for the JustceWalking Program. My name's Mandy Olivam, and I'm a jaywalker myself. Not only did I participate in this program as both a high school and college student, but I've walked this journey as the coordinator of numerous groups since. I spent several years as a retreat facilitator for high school and college-age young people at an inner-city retreat center, which offered retreat experiences rooted in Catholic social teaching that focused on forming relationships at the margins. So I'm honored to talk with you today about this jaywalking process, which is very near and dear to my heart. I want to offer a few side notes before we begin. First, most of the photos of the young people you'll see in this presentation today are of actual jaywalkers. You'll see them with their adult companions and the people they've befriended along the path. I'll try to identify them as we go along. Many are of jaywalkers I knew personally. It's so good to remember that just as Jesus' mission was personal, so is jaywalking. This is a program that real people bring to life. Second, I have with me on tech support this afternoon David Horvath from JustFaith Ministries. He'll be available via the chat feature to answer any questions you may have that arise during the presentation. Although we'll have a couple pauses for questions, please feel free to submit questions to him at any time so we can have them ready at the breaks. My hope is that this time together will offer you a deeper understanding of the mission, spirit, and practice of justice walking. Thanks for joining us. Simply put, jaywalking explores and experiments with ways to bring the gospel message preached and lived by Jesus into our contemporary 21st century context. JustceWalking explores the tenets of Catholic social teaching as they relate to poverty and invites participants through prayers and practices to seek a new paradigm of compassion. From reading the scriptures, we know Jesus spent time in places often overlooked by others. He wandered to the edge of society and sought out vulnerable people who had been pushed to the edge: sinners, beggars, blind and lame people, sick and diseased people, poor and weak people. But what if Jesus were alive today? Where would he walk if he lived in our communities? Who falls to the edge in our globalized world? If we actually lived as Jesus taught, how would our lives look? Jaywalkers ask questions and listen intently to each other and to God's message spoken through the voices of our vulnerable brothers and sisters. Jaywalkers are conscious of how their actions impact other people and the planet. Jaywalkers form friendships with the poor most immediately present to them. And in trying to walk like Jesus, jaywalkers become an example of how disciples can live their faith in the world today. How does JustceWalking help us to be these people, to enter into this kind of living? JustceWalking invites us to completely open ourselves to the potential of how the world can be and how God deems the world should be. As people who are considering this journey, in this very moment. So I invite you right now at your desk, at your computer screen, to just breathe in. Breathe in and breathe out. And with me, open yourself to a new vision. Take a moment to wonder, to imagine the world as it could be. Invite into your mind, your heart, the young people with whom you work, or those in your family, your neighborhood, your school, your church. What if we dared to look below the surface of these young people? What if, instead of thinking of teenagers as self-obsessed, sardonic, or superficial, we saw them as wells of promise? What if, instead of pettiness, we saw passion, or behind aloofness, we saw an untapped, authentic desire to care? What if we looked at them with God's eyes and saw their vast potential as reflections of the divine in our midst? Could the perspectives of young people help us to see systems or others differently? Could our youth become a force of change unlike any we've known? What if we looked into their hearts and saw the immense love they are willing to give if we just give them a chance? Justice Walking begins with the premise that young people aren't sub-adults or overgrown children we need to force into prefabricated molds of conformity or consistency. Rather, they're sacred receptacles of and channels for God's Spirit, who can bring, as Dorothy Day said, a revolution of the heart, which we all know the world desperately needs. What if youth were trusted and encouraged in mental displays of spirituality and instead awaken as the embodiment of Christ in our world today? Justice Walking brings these visions to life and makes God's reign manifest right before our eyes. In Jaywalking, you'll see teenagers walking into soup kitchens to eat alongside homeless people, transcending worldly barriers to care. You'll see them fasting from technology, turning off their iPods and even logging off Facebook to tune into their inner silence. You might see them holding a candlelight vigil on street corners for victims of violence worldwide and inviting passerby to pause with them for a moment in prayer. Your jaywalkers will tell you they are watching the news on purpose and instead of despairing, praying intently for a different world. You'll behold them befriending refugee children, learning their names and stories, suddenly seeing their country's connection to foreign lands in the shape of a person. They might skip lunch at school to fast in solidarity with starving people, using the time to read about hunger in their home communities. You'll sit with them as they listen and dialogue together about the struggle of a fast-paced life, about the distractions that keep them from really paying attention. Your youth will consider how the food they eat could possibly harm people or the planet, and will make more conscious choices to consume with compassion. You'll have the chance to walk alongside the silent pilgrims through city streets to witness the signs of our times, to wonder about the possibilities. Jaywalkers will look at clothing tags to avoid items made in sweatshops. Holistic reminder of baptism, recommitting to the holy call to be prophetic servants in the world. You might see them playing and dancing in pure joy with developmentally disabled adults without distinguishing who is helping who. They'll try to avoid malls, cinemas, stadiums, other centers of distraction, and instead focus their attention on deeper realities. Their penetrating gaze will delve into the hearts of all people, no matter how seemingly different, to glimpse the hidden Christ presence among us. And by altering their life choices, worldviews, and love patterns, these young people will be transforming themselves and transforming the world to usher in God's kingdom of justice. Just imagine this reality emerging in your parish, your youth group, through your jaywalking community. What a powerful image. People often ask, what kind of young person wants to say yes to jaywalking? Well, this is the answer. Almost certainly, a teenager you know is looking for this chance to care and connect more faithfully. Here on the screen are 3 real jaywalkers that I knew personally. From the top, there's Evan, David, and Leah, who are now continuing their lives in college and beyond, working for justice in separate and unique ways. Evan, for instance, was an honors student, wise beyond her years, who wanted a way to make her religious tradition relevant to her life. David was a wrestler, a really popular guy who was just asking deep questions about the world and how he could live his life more meaningfully. Leah was a sweetheart. She had such a big, loving heart. She just wanted a way to learn how to care more for people beyond those immediate circumstances, her day-to-day interactions. So what kind of person wants to jaywalk? Just consider the people you know, the young people in your community. Who is looking for a way to put their deep faith into more significant action? Which young people have gone on mission trips or have wanted to find ways to help others in their community and beyond? Who notices overlooked people, the ones no one else seems to see? Who's the voice of challenge in your youth group or your class? Who urges others to search more carefully? Which young person is a contemplative presence? Who yearns for a more guided prayer life or a richer sense of community through prayer? Who follows through? Who will practice what they preach? Who is a presence of compassion in your group? Who's willing to break open their heart and let in difficult realities? Who expresses interest in social justice issues and will say yes to a holy challenge? Which young person is open to new ideas, ways of looking at the world and other people? Who's willing to trust? Of each person. Which young person is thirsty for a renewed spiritual depth? These are the young people who should be personally invited by you to consider jaywalking. A general mailing or passing out flyers might recruit a few participants, but when a young person hears from a respected adult figure, "I see a unique depth in you. Would you like to learn more about jaywalking?" Or, "I've noticed you're really considering your faith carefully these days. Perhaps this could be the next step." Or, "I know you're really struggling with the paradoxes in our church. This group will be exploring that tension." They're more willing to consider this possibility for themselves. What an honor it is, as jaywalking coordinators, to serve as the encouragers of prophetic young people. Sometimes all these young people need process. However, I've known several younger high school students with the maturity and the willingness to commit to jaywalking, and they happen to find this to be the spiritual path they very much needed. You and the young people you know can discern together whether they're ready to join a group of older high schoolers or if they should wait a year to participate in the next group. So how can you bring the powerful visions of jaywalking to fruition for the young people who are thirsty for this experience? Although this process holds profound promises, it is very practical and very possible. Jaywalking groups have sprung up across the country, initiated by people who've been inspired to do something radically different in their communities. Some of these folks have worked in ministry, but some have not. The program makes it possible for anyone to run a jaywalking group. So, let's look at the program itself. Here are some brief points about what the jaywalking becomes realized. The jaywalking program is designed for older high school students and a minimum of 2 adult companions. As I said before, 1 or 2 younger high schoolers might do well in your group if they're appropriately committed. Jaywalking is a flexible program that can take place in a summer, a semester, or over the course of a full school year, depending on the schedule that suits the needs of your group, anywhere between 3 and 6 months. It's important to give this process proper time. Jaywalking isn't something that can be done. We'll talk more about the schedule later, but usually meetings happen once a week or every other week. The adults and youth who become jaywalkers form a small community together. The ideal size for a group is between 7 and 12 people. Remember, Jesus had only 12 close followers. The smallness allows a dimension of substance. Although the adults of the group coordinate logistical details such as registration, printing permission slips, and collecting fees, they are just as much jaywalkers as the young people with whom they walk. This level field creates rich opportunities to go deeper together, to openly share struggles and insights as fellow pilgrims on this path to justice. Because jaywalking asks a lot of its participants, jaywalkers must choose this journey. There are no requirements in jaywalking, only invitations, and participants must be willing to say yes to these invitations and take the process seriously in order for the work of the Spirit to happen. If one person truly doesn't want to be there, it sours the experience for everyone. We've all had that situation happen. That's why it's important to discern honestly before committing, and to commit fully once you do sign on. When everyone is giving their all, the result is beautiful and profound. And the great news is this: if you do truly feel called to what this program entails, you can do it. The least to most experienced ministers and adult volunteers can facilitate jaywalking. Each session leads you step by step and outlines even the most basic pieces. Also, there is always support from the JustFaith staff to answer questions, offer advice, and clarify any questions you may have. Anyone who has a willing heart can lead jaywalking. Now you might be thinking, wow, jaywalking sounds pretty hard. Well, I'd be lying to you if I said it was easy. But after all, Jesus didn't live the easy life. And remember, hundreds of people across the country have said yes to this abundantly rich and nourishing. Words of wisdom from Scripture and justice figures from our faith, eye-opening rituals, rich texts, and joyful relationships that come to us as we jaywalk offer overflowing. Jaywalking really puts the discipline back into discipleship. When Jesus said, "Follow me," he meant it. And he also knew that if the disciples really walked his path, they would find greater reward than they could have ever imagined. Jaywalkers learn to follow this path of discipleship through prayer and practice. Following the example of Jesus, jaywalkers prayerfully welcome into our hearts the realities of a suffering world. As a result of this expanded awareness, we also begin to live differently. The process of jaywalking helps us to do both and to find the balance between prayer and action. At the heart of this journey are the friendships you will form at a social service agency your group will visit together many times throughout the course of the process. Actually knowing and caring for people on the margins is the face of a friend who has a name and a story. Relationships show us that we are all God's children, responsible for one another. We'll explore this part of the process in greater detail later. If we really embrace justice walking, we can't possibly be the same. If our hearts and minds and lives are truly open to the work of God through this process, we'll have an authentic conversion experience. The word conversion just means to turn around, to gain a new perspective, to see what's been waiting to be seen just over our shoulders, to awaken to what or who was once hidden from our sight. This conversion opens us to the suffering of our brothers and sisters and our profound connection to them. Suddenly, the reign of God is no longer an abstract idea. It's the possibility for the world we create as a human family. These words help to summarize the jaywalking process. And another way to talk about it is to say what this program is not. Because jaywalking follows a unique model that may be unfamiliar to you, you might feel the temptation to try to make it fit a framework you already know, chosen intentionally. It's designed to be different so as to yield a different spiritual depth, to cultivate real community, and to foster lasting transformation in people's lives. You aren't really jaywalking if you only do part of the process or pick and choose the pieces that you like. Again, each element has been included for a reason. I personally have witnessed even the most initially resistant jaywalkers look back at the end of their journey and see exactly why they needed the seemingly uncomfortable or unlikely experiences that jaywalking presented to them. Trust this process. Trust God's work on you through this program. Hundreds of people who have tried it know that it does work. Furthermore, trust that whoever is meant to participate in the process from your parish, school, or community will say yes. As we've said, jaywalking is a small group process. It isn't a youth rally or a large social event where often more people indicates the event's success. The small size of a jaywalking group follows Jesus' model and allows everyone to be included well, to be truly listened to and learned from. When seeking potential jaywalkers, simply process and offer your help and guidance as you discern whether this is what they are looking for at this time. No one can be forced or required to change their heart. Here's another countercultural message. Jaywalking is not for everyone. This isn't because the gospel invitation isn't for everyone. In fact, Jesus calls all of us to follow him. But it's not for everyone because not everyone is ready or willing to respond to such a radical invitation. Remain open to the movement of the Spirit. I've had several jaywalking groups as small as 7 people, and also groups so large we had to split them up into several jaywalking groups. Many possibilities could be just what your community needs. And we trust that where 2 or 3 are gathered in the name of something greater, Christ is present. The countercultural approach of jaywalking is of gathering, praying, and living together. So now that we've gone through a little bit about this jaywalking process, I would love to take a minute or two to hear from you all. Okay, it looks like Dawn from Louisville, Kentucky has a question. She asks, which is a very common question, is it a good idea for young people to struggle with such difficult realities? This is definitely something that people bring to us often just because of the nature of inviting suffering into one's life. As I said earlier, no one look at the tradition of Catholicism, of Christianity. If we turn to our scriptures, we see that it was always young people who were called by God to embrace their prophetic capacity. Even if we look at Jeremiah and Mary, those people were very young and often had a lot of trepidation about their ability to carry God's message in the world. But those young people are the ones we have been waiting for. Young people bear this unique tension between childhood and adulthood, between a freshness of perspective and an awareness of the world and an ability to hold that awareness that really opens them to a unique place where God can break through and offer us a deeper vision, a better vision of the world in which we live. So I would say that although it's definitely difficult for anyone to participate in jaywalking, or for that matter, to embrace the gospel message, young people are the ones we need to gear toward most, because they are the ones who will really be able to lead the struggle for justice in our communities. So thank you for such a great question, Dawn. I really appreciate it. We have another question which asks how to get a program, a JustceWalking program, started in your parish. We'll go on to talk about this a little bit later on in greater detail, but the first step is to connect with the leadership in your parish, to really get the support of your pastor, your youth minister, and several maybe supportive adults who see this prophetic capacity in young people and who are willing to embrace it. As I said, we'll talk a little bit in greater detail about how you can start that conversation. There's also a document on our website, on the JusticeWalking webpage, which is justfaith.org/JusticeWalking, called the Getting Started document, and that outlines much of what we'll talk through later in the presentation. So thanks for such a good question. A final question. Is 3 to 6 months too large of a commitment to ask young folks for? Well, excellent question. We all know, not just adults, but young people are very overextended in the world today, especially with the different, potentially more attractive options clattering for young people's attention. 3 to 6 months might sound like a lot, but the fact is that we make time for what we value. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, about how to breach this conversation with young people. But oftentimes we ask young people to fill their lives in tons of vapid ways, to go shopping at the mall, to play video games, to spend hours on Facebook. And these hours add up to the extent of this program. What if instead they were receiving the message from adults? Maybe you should use this time to contemplate deeper prayer, or why don't we gather together and try spiritual practices that allow us to embody the gospel justice message? If they were receiving these messages from adults, young people would respond and accept these invitations and challenges. So is 3 to 6 months too large of a commitment? I would say if you're going to look for true transformation, you can't condense it into something smaller. 3 to 6 months, just think, a baby takes 9 months to gestate, to come into the world. So if we're really going to birth something new within us and in our communities, we're going to have to give it proper time. But great, great question. Thank you all so much for your feedback. So good to know where we are. And if you have any questions that come up along the way, please continue to send them to David, and he'll condense those at the end of the presentation. We can take another time for questions. So now our collective question is, how do I get started? Which is relevant to a question someone has already asked. For sure, taking those initial steps can seem intimidating, but like I've said, the JWalking program makes it easy. There are several simple steps to setting up a JWalking group, each of which we'll outline here. Like I said before, these are detailed even more The first step, if you haven't already, is to find another adult who is willing to facilitate this process with you. Each JWalking group should have a minimum of 2 adults for safety and legal reasons. One adult must be over the age of 21, but both adults must be able to commit to the entire JWalking process. Your fellow coordinator might be a volunteer at your parish, a parent of a potential JWalker, a minister or teacher in your community, or another adult with a passion for justice. Above all, this other adult should be someone who is seriously committed to the vision of JWalking, someone who's willing to walk with your younger participants as a fellow pilgrim on the journey. You may also want to form an advisory committee of supportive adults who can give encouragement and make suggestions to you and your fellow adult companion throughout the JWalking process. This is an optional step, but one that can really help if facilitating a group like this is new for you. Compile a list of potentially interested adults, maybe some who you considered as a potential co-coordinator, and personally invite 4 or 5 of these people to meet with you a few times throughout the program, outside of your JWalking meetings. Be sure to offer them information about the program so they can give support within the context of the mission of JWalking. The second step is to find a supportive parish, school, or diocesan office that can serve as your sponsoring agency. This support, especially in screening adults for work with minors and providing insurance coverage. Just consider your own community. Does your parish have a youth house? Is there a facility in a parish office or a local community center that meets these criteria? Maybe you know a religious community who works for justice, or maybe you have a retreat center in your neighborhood. Meet with the appropriate person at this place and offer them some information about jaywalking. Talk with them about this partnership in a way that affirms the mutually life-giving relationship that can be formed. One of the most significant aspects of jaywalking is the time spent at a local social service agency, a place where personal relationships with marginalized people can be formed. How can we truly become rooted and grounded in the gospel call to love forgotten people if we never meet them face to face? For this reason, it can be harmful to the process to think of the meeting at the margins as a place to do service. Serving others is not a bad thing to do, of course. It simply isn't the primary practice of jaywalking. Sometimes when we think of doing service for others, we create a dichotomy, an us and them mentality, which fosters a degree of separation between the giver and the receiver. But in actually meeting another person, there is a mutual exchange. Both people give and receive something much greater than any service could offer. This was the practice of Jesus, who spent his time mostly sharing stories, dining, visiting, and walking. These are the holy spaces where mutual healing happens. We are reaching out in this jaywalking process so that these people can reach into our lives and change our hearts. That's why when choosing your meeting at the margin site, you should consider places where you can actually meet people, share conversations and personal connections. For instance, my different jaywalking groups have gone to play with children at an English school for refugees, to eat at a soup kitchen with homeless men, and to potluck dinners with immigrants at a Catholic worker house in our community. The possibilities are numerous. In some cases, you may end up doing something that looks like service as an excuse to get to know people. For instance, one of my groups offered childcare at a shelter for homeless families as the reason for our visits, although it was actually just the excuse to get to meet the kids. The important thing is that you, as a jaywalker, are actually there to have one-on-one opportunities to share stories, form friendships, and learn about others' lives, while sharing bits of your own. Maybe you're close to a nursing home for low-income elders or a center for developmentally disabled adults. Many places care. Because the hope is to form friendships that deepen into real relationships, it's helpful if you go somewhere where you'll meet the same people each time. It's also ideal to choose a site that isn't a temporary establishment. You want a place people gather regularly. There might be a temptation to jump around your community, going to a soup kitchen one week, a migrant Catholic worker house the next, and then an addiction recovery center another week. Although I can understand the interest in meeting many people who fall to the edge of our typical circles, this practice of jumping around actually defeats the purpose of intentionally forming significant relationships that leave a lasting impression on our hearts. Because the whole point of going to the margins is to live into the truth that Thomas Merton, a famous contemporary, when we authentically invite unlikely people into our lives, everything begins to change about the way we think, feel, and live. Can you just imagine the possibilities such friendships can bring to living your faith as a jaywalker? So once you've found a sponsoring agency and a meeting at the margins place, it's fine to designate a meeting space. Does your sponsoring agency have a chapel, a meeting room, a classroom, or other intimate space in which you can create your community? It should be a place that will remain undisturbed during your meeting, quiet enough so that participants can hear each other well, but big enough for everyone to feel comfortable. Small enough, however, to maintain intimacy. The best place is somewhere where jaywalkers can sit in a circle on chairs or pillows or on the floor, centered around your prayer cloth. Remember, your meeting at the margins site. Be sure that there is a space at your meeting at the margins site to meet after your relationship building time. It could be a large office or maybe an empty cafeteria. Especially when working with minors, it's always important to remain mindful of the rules and regulations that keep everyone safe. Please be sure to talk with folks who can give information on the proper guidelines and procedures you'll need to follow. Especially when considering beginning a group in your own parish, it's important to get parental permission as well as archdiocesan support. Things go smoothest when everyone is on board. Now that all the logistics of a meeting place have been decided, go ahead and with your fellow adult coordinator, set a schedule for this process. Jaywalking consists of 12 meetings, 2 retreats to open and close the process, a pilgrimage, and a dialogue session that allows jaywalkers to share their journey with the community. These can be spread out flexibly according to the needs of your group. There are just a few important things to bear in mind. One is to keep meetings consistent. It's okay to take brief breaks for holidays or for other occasions, but to help participants remember when to meet, good to gather weekly or bi-weekly. Big gaps can also distance the sense of community that's very intentionally cultivated by gathering consistently, and it can also cause jaywalkers to fall out of the rhythm of the process. For instance, maybe your group would settle on Sunday afternoons at 3 p.m. for your regular meetings and Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. for your meeting at the margins. Consistent days and times help everyone stay on the same page. Also, be sure to plan retreats soon. Plan them now. If you need to book a retreat center or other facility for your retreats, it's best to do this as far in advance as possible so you can be sure space is available. These are overnight experiences that are designed to really solidify a sense of community quickly in your group. So it's important to know the proper venue is available, especially for the opening retreat, which is the first time you'll gather formally as a jaywalking group. Once you have a set schedule, sign on wholeheartedly. Jaywalking is an intensive process that doesn't easily fit into the way our lives tend to be structured. As we've said before, jaywalkers must choose this, and that means making space for meetings, retreats, and the practices in between, even though our busy lives clatter for our attention. Someone asked earlier, how do young people make space for this? I know many young people who participate in competitive sports and make time for daily practices. As with any sport training, making regular time to practice with others example to the other jaywalkers of the commitment to the process. What I've found, and what was definitely true for me when I was in high school, is that young people are actually just waiting for someone to invite them to be something more, to do something outside the norm. People will make time for what they care about, and young people will make time for this if it truly resonates. All the details are in place now. Now it's time to invite young people into this possibility. On the screen is a photo of my very first jaywalking group when I was a young participant. There I am in the front on the left with several of my friends who are now young adults living out our lives for justice in various ways. We all still stay in touch. One of us is in seminary, one works with at-risk youth, one is a youth minister, and one's a social studies teacher. No matter where we are, all of us have certainly been influenced by our jaywalking experience and continue to seek to embody the lessons we found together. When gathering your jaywalkers, just remember the points that we've already made. First, that personal invitations are the best way to ask. In our scriptures, we're told that it was when young Samuel heard his name called in the quiet that he came to God and said, "Here I am." Mary was asked face to face by God's messenger, and in hearing that she was chosen, she also said yes. As the jaywalking coordinator, it's important for you to resist the temptations that are the pitfalls of many youth ministry efforts. Keep in mind that jaywalking is for the few. Small is significant. And jaywalking is not a series of optional meetings or drop-ins. It's a process that requires your full presence and commitment. Furthermore, jaywalking can't be done to you or for you. It can only be done through you if you are a willing participant who is genuinely interested and invested. And lastly, as unlikely as it sounds, I promise you that young people will respond to the gift of this opportunity. Someone you know right now is just waiting for the chance to jaywalk, even if they don't yet know it. The final step in starting Justice Walking is to register your group with JustFaith Ministries. After the team of coordinators is in place, the sponsoring agency and meeting space have been identified, and the jaywalkers have been selected. Ideally, groups should register at least 6 weeks before the opening retreat is scheduled to take place. To register, simply go to our website. There's an online registration process. If you have any questions, just contact our office and someone can assist you. The cost of the JustceWalking program is intentionally kept affordable so that any group with the willingness to participate is able. At JustFaith, we really strive to make this process accessible to everyone. So if cost is the barrier keeping you from participating in jaywalking, just connect with us and we can explore creative ways to make this happen in your community. Some expenses will need to be covered for the group. You can decide whether to tap into funds available through your parish or supporting agency, or to divide it up amongst your participants so that each one contributes to the total cost. The registration fee allows you to enlist as an official jaywalking group. The fee of $225 includes not only all the necessary documents, but the support and assistance of the JustFaith staff. We're always happy to help you in every way you need, every step of the way. Your group will also need some program resources to accompany the process. The cost for these is $40, and the companion CD and DVD elements really enrich the content of the process. Other expenses can be paid for by participants personally. Participants generally pay for their books and journal. This tangible investment reflects a deeper commitment by them. For $35, jaywalkers receive 2 books, which they'll read throughout the jaywalking program, as well as a companion journal, which is full of inspirational, supportive content and carries participants through each step of the process. Additionally, there will be fees pertinent to retreats, but these will depend on your group's specific arrangements and needs. Be sure, however, to factor these into the program cost for each participant so there aren't any surprises along the way. Hopefully, this bit of time and exploration of the spirit and embodiment of Justice Walking has been both instructive and inspiring. But now it's up to you. How might you take the next step? Here are some suggestions and resources, which are all available on our website. If you'd like to hear a little more from other voices about how the jaywalking process unfolds and impacts lives, check out our introductory video. This can give you an even fuller sense of the process. And as I said, it's located on our website or on YouTube. Maybe you'd like to try an activity or prayer from Justice Walking to get a practical feel for the program. Take a look at the resource JustFaith has compiled for the Year of Faith at the following link. You'll find pieces taken directly from the jaywalking program, so you can try it out in your own youth group or school. Perhaps this presentation has brought to mind someone else who needs to hear the good news of Justice Walking. If so, forward them a link to our promotional video, a sample jaywalking session, which is located on our website, or suggest this webinar will be available soon on our website and will also be sent to you. Most of all, if you've been moved by the powerful possibilities described here, seriously take time to discern. Offer up your questions in prayer. Engage in dialogue with colleagues and other co-missionaries who can offer support as you consider jaywalking. As you spend this time in discernment, I implore you to consider 3 core questions of jaywalking. First, do you care? Second, do you really care? And finally, if you care, who do you care for? If we really attempted to live as Jesus called us to live, we would find ourselves in a process of constant conversion through care for the most vulnerable of God's people. It is the extent of our willingness to let the world in that determines how well we will respond. If you feel the stirring for something more, begin. Your young people are just waiting for someone to ask them these core questions and then to offer them a path to follow toward a new way of living and loving. Thank you all so much for your time and attention this afternoon. We'll end up finishing a few minutes early, although following this brief closing prayer, we'll have another opportunity for you to ask any questions that might have arisen during the rest of the presentation. Truly, my gratitude is overflowing to you, you who have turned your ear toward voiceless people, who yearn to look into the eyes of forgotten ones, who search for salvation through relationship with other children of God. Something greater is meant to be born through us into the world for the glory of God who is unbounded love. Jaywalking invites us to be such co-creators, people who take concrete steps according to Christ's effort of peace and justice in our world. It gives me so much hope to think of the potential that's swirling here in this space and time, cultivated through our program. May God's presence be felt by you as you move forward into the grand invitation of gospel justice. So in closing, I invite you to take a breath, to come fully into this moment, to feel the presence of the Spirit enveloping you with grace. And so we pray together. God of justice, what does it take to walk into your reign? Love, have to let go of the world we think we know and let compassion move us into a different way of being. God, you know that hopeful news can be hard for us to find. When we focus only on what is wrong, we develop a negative worldview. But prophetic people try to see the world your Son imagined. Insight comes from looking through these signs of our times with the light of faith. So we move from this place to serve as your hands, your eyes, your heart, your hope in the world. As prophetic people, we live the message that God sees, God knows, God cares, and God's abundant love rules over us all. We pray in the name of the one you sent, Jesus, who walks with us as our guide toward your reign. Amen. So let's open space once more for any final questions. Thank you all again for such dedicated and attentive presence. So we have a question from Mary Beth in Minnesota. She asks, has this program been done in Catholic high schools? Well, Mary, actually, even in just my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, yes, this program has been implemented. It's been offered as an extracurricular after-school activity, primarily for juniors and seniors in high school. Mostly, the model we've found that's worked, because we have primarily single-sex high schools in Louisville has been a partnership between all-boy high schools and all-girl high schools. So a handful of girls from an all-girl high school and a handful of boys from an all-boy, one teacher from each school who choose a common meeting space, usually at one of the schools for their meetings that take place at home, but then who journey together to the meetings at the margins. This has been an incredibly successful model because usually there's an initial immediate rapport that the students have with the teachers who agree to co-facilitate. That instantly creates the sense that the young people are interested in saying yes. Also, having the partnership between two different schools question from Mary. Thank you so much. It would definitely work in Catholic high schools. And it's also good to consider making this an elective, maybe a capstone kind of activity, especially for seniors who are looking for ways to kind of cap off their high school career in a significant and powerful into the world as young adults. Any more questions? Has been that most Christians find this program relevant. Definitely there is language and ritual in this program deeply rooted in the Catholic tradition. For instance, making the sign of the cross and kind of redefining that symbol of our faith is an integral part of each jaywalking session that happens. So although these elements might not be as familiar with other Christians as they are with Catholics, it's certainly something that naturally flows in the process and that non-Catholics could become easily initiated into for the sake of the process. There's nothing exclusively Catholic about the program. It's very open, very embracing of different Christian traditions. So my thought is that especially if someone's open to learning a little bit about those elements, this could be for anyone. Excellent question. Again, thank you all so much. If you have any additional questions following this webinar, or if you just want to connect with us, program in your own community, or if you want some help finding out how to begin, just visit us on our website, justfaith.org/justicewalking, or contact us by phone or email. That contact info is on your screen now. May God's blessings and the gospel call to justice implore you to consider a deeper love for not only the youth in your own community, but for God's children across the globe. And may we all, in our separate journeys, find a unity that comes from knowing that together we walk toward a deeper vision, a fuller vision of manifested peace through each one of us, through each relationship. Thank you so much. Blessings on your weekend.